Well, good evening, and welcome to this webinar brought to you by the St. John Paul II National Shrine. My name is Ken Balbuena, and I am the Director of Communications and Outreach at the Shrine. I will be serving as your host for today's webinar. And thank you for joining us on this Feast of the Rosary. Today we are featuring Marek Czarnecki, an iconographer and friend of the Knights of Columbus who own and operate the St. John Paul II National Shrine. Marek is an artist, restorer, and community scholar for Connecticut's Polish American community. Now, originally from Bristol, Connecticut, Marek attended local schools and graduated from the School of Visual Arts in New York. An unexpected commission began his 3 decades of studying historical Byzantine iconography. The Connecticut Commission on the Arts awarded Marek its 1996 Painting Fellowship, and he received the honor a second time in 2004. His icons hang in homes and public spaces across the country, including the Franciscan University of Steubenville, the Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception in Springfield, Illinois, and Yale University's St. Thomas More Chapel. The American Council of Catholic Bishops selected Marek's icon of Jesus Christ, the Eternal High Priest, to commemorate the Year of the Priest, and more than 1 million copies were printed and distributed internationally. Now, today's webinar will be a little bit different than normal than our previous webinars, as it will be more of a lecture style instead of the interview format many of our audience have been used to seeing. We will, however, still have a question and answer period at the end of the webinar, so please be sure to type your questions in the Q&A box below. We will do our best to get through as many of them as possible. And we're very pleased to have Marek with us this evening, so let's go ahead and get started. Marek, thank you so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, thank you, Ken. Tonight's topic about the Our Lady of Czestochowa is something that means a lot to me, both as an artist and as a Catholic.
It definitely means a lot to many of our audience out there. We had over 273 people register for this webinar in particular, and we've got a couple more that are tuning on our YouTube channel as well. But I know that they didn't come to look at me and come to hear me talk. They wanted to hear you talk. So I'm going to go ahead and whenever you're ready, I'll turn my mic off and turn my video off, so that way we can turn the floor over to you.
Okay. I just wanted to say that, like a lot of working immigrant families, our house never had any artwork. And the only kind of artwork we did have were calendar pictures that my father would cut out from our church calendar. And in the kitchen was the icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa. And from the first time I can remember seeing her, her image has been a puzzle to me. It's been a presence, and thank God, new questions about her still keep popping up for me. You know, the other thing is, for a lot of Polish people, we can fall into another trap. And that's when something becomes so familiar, we don't see it. So that's one of my jobs tonight, not only to get you to look at the icon, but also to help you look through it. Just give me a second. Sorry. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm having a Lucy Ricardo moment.
Sure, not a problem. I'm sure some people in our audience may not be aware who Lucy Ricardo is, but it looks like that if you have up on the top towards there, you see the...
You got it.
Okay, perfect. Excellent.
Here it comes.
So, and for those in our audience, Marek comes highly recommended by the Knights of Columbus Museum, which is over in New Haven, Connecticut. It's the official museum of the Knights of Columbus. And very soon they will be rebranded as the Blessed Michael J. McGivney Pilgrimage Center. So we're hosting this webinar at their invitation, and we're very happy to have Marek with us. So looks like you're all set though, Marek. So I'll go ahead and turn my camera back off.
I got it. Okay, I have a lot of visual material prepared for you, because I think that if I just spoke about it, I don't think you could ever possibly imagine what I'm talking about. I think it's impossible to overstate the importance of the icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa to anybody Polish. She's so deeply embedded in our personal lives and collective history that I wouldn't be surprised if someday somehow imprinted into ourselves. Every August, even to this day, hundreds of thousands of Poles pour out from cities and villages walking for days with the annual national pilgrimage to Częstochowa. But wherever there is a Polonia or a community of Poles outside of Poland, her image will be there with them. America has its own impressive shrine in Doylestown, Pennsylvania. The first settlement of Poles in America was named Panna Maria, Texas, or Virgin Mary. So it's no surprise that 5 miles north is another town named Częstochowa. But as familiar as the image is, if I ask 10 Poles, why is the icon so dark? And why is she scarred? I would get back 12 answers. So tonight, I would like to offer you the 13th. Over 30 years, I've made about a dozen copies of Our Lady of Czestochowa, but instead of becoming more familiar, the face becomes more enigmatic, and the simple act of copying this icon becomes more and more difficult. Icon painting has a very long tradition that reaches back to the catacombs, and icons have very specific canons or rubrics guiding their construction and appearance. I can promise you, Our Lady of Czestochowa is unlike any icon in the world, ever. It belongs to no known historic, ethnic, or geographic style of icon painting, nor is it possible to locate a similar image like her in any era or school of Western art. My talk is based from the 1,000 questions I ask myself every time I have to paint a copy of this icon. I work with a historic technique and materials that would be familiar to a 13th century icon painter. I know how to build an icon from the inside out. The best way to learn a tradition is to follow the steps of somebody who knows it better, and icon painters learn by copying. I scrutinize an icon, and over time, I've learned to discern always the presence of two people inside. First, the person or saint that it represents. And in the Częstochowa image, I can clearly hear the Mother of God, but then when I look to listen for the painter and analyze his decisions from bottom to top, instead of hearing one voice, I hear several voices, and those several voices are all arguing. For 1 week every year, Our Lady of Czestochowa is removed from her ebony altar. A conservator, Professor Wojciech Kurpik, scrutinizes the panel, assesses any damage, and makes any necessary repairs. His book, the Częstochowa Hodegetria, is the most thorough and fact-based study to date on the icon. His investigations peer underneath and inside the icon's many layers of destruction and restoration. Kripik has used the tools of modern technology to uncover the icon's past and has given us new insights that were impossible to see by any other means. He reports that there is more to know than its surface. The dark, scarred icon is actually repainted over centuries of damage and repair, and it's passed through many hands and many changes. His most important icon discovery he made is that the icon we see and know is painted over a much earlier one. Underneath what we see are 3 very small remaining scraps glued to the original panel. X-rays of the panel reveal its desecration was also much more violent than we imagined. Our Lady's face was not only slashed on the cheeks, but the whole icon was hacked into pieces. If we listen to Professor Kurpik, if we reread the historic documents in the Polish archives, then we can quiet down our own projections. We can let the scarred face of the icon testify to the truth of herself. As she describes her arrival, then her desecration and reconstruction, she will be retelling the social, religious, and political conflicts of 15th century Poland. If we could join Professor Kurpik in his laboratory on Palm Sunday, we would first watch carefully how the Pauline Fathers remove the icon's crowns and jeweled covers. When they turn over the icon, we can watch them remove this hidden painting attached to the back of the panel dated 1682. In Latin, it proclaims, "This is the table of the most powerful Mary, furniture from her home in Nazareth, which came to Russia from Byzantium. Arriving from Bells, it has dwelled on this bright mountain for 300 years. Around the inscription are many cartouches illustrating episodes of the origin of the icon, its translation to Czestochowa, and some of its miracles. The top central cartouche shows us the legendary origin of the icon. Now, my image doesn't have enough resolution to make a legible detail, so I'm turning to an antique souvenir print that was made in Czestochowa for the icon's 1910 recoronation. We can see on the left, a group of pious women are asking St. Luke if he could paint for them a portrait of the Virgin Mary. In the middle, we can see he's finished with the Czestochowa icon on his easel. There are at least 20 icons today in the world that claim that same apostolic authorships, but our icon is the only one to add this other detail, that St. Luke used a tabletop made by St. Joseph from Nazareth. And on the far right side, St. Joseph and the Christ child eat off this table. This is a very beautiful legend, and I wish it were true. And indeed, the icon is very old, but the panels have been dated to the middle of the 13th century and are made from linden wood, a tree common in Central Europe, but not in the Holy Land. Sadly, none of the other 24 other icons claiming St. Luke's authorship stand up to the test of scientific dating either. But while the legends do not stand up to historical scrutiny, they still have some truth to give us and another kind of honest information, namely what the icon means. One fact we find in this legend is St. Luke's Gospel recounts the most biographical information about the Virgin Mary, or as her family called her during her lifetime, Miriam of Nazareth. Holy tradition, corroborated by other scholarship, concurs one of the sources for Luke's Gospels could have been told to him directly by that historical Miriam of Nazareth, or they were stories that were kept and passed on as an oral tradition by those closest to her. But for an icon painter, whether someone's life is retold in a text, or as iconographers often say, written as an icon, these are equal and parallel expressions of the same storytelling. Icons were rightly called Bibles of the poor, and until literacy was commonplace, the only way to learn your scripture was through pictures. Another interesting fact is that St. Luke was Greek, and unlike the Jewish disciples of Christ, a Greek would have been much more culturally disposed to make an image. The legends also teach us something that lays at the foundation of Christianity. Recording of a testimony or the making of a portrait show that the Virgin Mary and the Christ child were real historic human beings that could be heard and seen. A first century portrait painted from life would be a first-hand document of their presence. The use of a piece of furniture showed that the ordinariness of their private lives was very much like ours. After her death, Mary assumes into heaven body and soul, and unlike other saints, she leaves behind no relics and no physical proofs of her existence. Her images filled that vacuum and took on the importance of a first-class relic. So was there ever an icon painted by St. Luke? The story was first connected to an icon called the Hodegetria, a Greek title which means she who shows the way. In the legend, St. Helen discovered and brought this icon by St. Luke from the Holy Land to Constantinople, along with many other important relics in the 4th century. After Crusaders sacked the city, the Hodegetria icon disappeared. It was either hidden and lost or stolen as booty. Crusaders looted works of art. They looted icons and even entire bodies of the saints that were carried away to the Latin West. But despite that legend of St. Helen, and despite the fact that it's retold as part of the Czestochowa origin story, carbon dating does not allow us to make this connection. No one yet has been able to say with any certainty the true origin of the Czestochowa icon or its author. except that it was made sometime around 1250 AD. Professor Kurpik theorizes it could have originally have come somewhere in the Eastern Orthodox Balkans. From the large size of the icon's panel, it's 48 by 34 inches, we can assume that it was for a church and not a private devotional image. To make this process of identification even harder, unlike works of art, icons are almost never signed or dated as a gesture of humility, a rubric that we still observe. The prototype for the Czestochowa icon is the Choregitria, or She Who Shows the Way, and is historically the most copied icon of the Mother of God. This black and white drawing from an iconographer's pattern book establishes the pose specific for this title. The Mother of God points to the Christ child enthroned in her other arm. He blesses us while holding a scroll in the other hand. Next to this pattern book picture are a few examples that show how this pattern was internationally expressed over a period of 700 years. What we do know factually and with complete certainty is that our icon was the personal property of Władysław Opolczyk, a nobleman from Belz, which is a city now in Western Ukraine. Prior to his ownership, we can say absolutely nothing with certainty about the icon's creation, or even how it found its way into Opolczyk's hands. More importantly, something else we can only speculate about and may never know is what that 13th century icon looked like. What we see today is not that 13th century icon, but a much later reconstruction painted over that icon on its original boards. But the authenticity of the Czestochowa icon is not in its origins, nor do we need to enhance its reputation by inventing or borrowing legends from other icons. Every copy of an icon creates a new icon, and inside, we can see the spiritual state of the individual who painted it. We can see the condition of the church when it was made, and we can see the climate of the world when the icon was completed. State of the world and the circumstances of the icon's creation start with a strange political dilemma in 14th century Poland. Its laws made no provisions for the country to be ruled by a queen, and the Polish line of royal succession ends with Queen Jadwiga of Anjou. The issue was resolved with a very bizarre solution. A law was passed that legally declared her a man, and therefore the king. But how could the stability of her lineage be guaranteed after her death? The problem was solved by marrying the 14-year-old Jadwiga to the pagan Lithuanian Duke Jagiello. Like Saint Vladimir of Kiev in Russia, he had his choice of Catholic or Orthodox royalty to marry, and for many reasons, he chose a union that would direct him and his country towards Western Catholic Europe. Their marriage created the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which was one of the largest countries in Europe until the 17th century. An important condition of the marriage was that Jagiello, along with his court, the nobles, and citizens of Lithuania, were all to be baptized into the Catholic Church. Jagiello reorganized the governance of Polish and Lithuanian provinces by appointing his own men while displacing others. He appointed his baptismal godfather, Władysław Opolczyk, then the governor of Rus, and made him the administrator of southeastern Poland. This began the chain of cause and effect that would culminate in the icon's destruction. From the city of Belz, Opolczyk relocated to accept his new post. He brought with him all of his possessions, including his very large, very old icon of the Mother of God. At his arrival in Czestochowa, there was already a modest settlement of Hungarian hermit monks living on the peak of one of the few mountains on Poland's flat landscape. Opolczyk expanded the monastery and donated his icon to the followers of St. Paul the Hermit, who enshrined it in its model. The icon rapidly gained a reputation as an image that answered prayers and wrought miraculous cures. In a very short time, the mountain became a well-known destination for pilgrims all over Europe. The monastery was named Jasna Gora, the bright mountain. But Jasna also means clearly visible. That's good for wandering pilgrims, but easy to find for invaders, as the history of the monastery shows over and over. One of those early pilgrims who visited the icon as a boy was Poland's first historian, Jan Długosz. He was the first to write about the icon at Częstochowa in his chronicles. His description of the icon is very devout but very general, as if he were describing a vision of the Virgin Mary herself. His awe leaves us no specific details that can help us piece together how the icon originally appeared. Just for the sake of my talk, and to help us fill in this blank, I want to use this other icon as a placekeeper for what Opolczyk's icon may have looked like before its renovation. I'm not saying that this was it, but when I saw this in the Moscow Kremlin Museum, I was struck by the many parallel elements with the Częstochowa icon. It was painted during the same time as the dating of the other icon boards. It's almost exactly the same size as the Częstochowa icon, and both use the same prototype of the Mother of God, with similar proportions and similar silhouettes. Keep this icon in mind as we go on. Now, imagine living in an era before there was any understanding of bacteria or the circulation of blood, or before the availability of penicillin, a time when too many women died in childbirth, and when there were few doctors. And those doctors who practiced medicine were more likely to kill you than heal you, with remedies as absurd as bloodletting or ingesting mercury. Often, and probably a better solution, your only remedy was a prayer and a miracle. From the arrival of the icon to the present day, the Pauline Fathers have kept careful records of the hundreds of thousands of answered prayers wrought through the icon. Grateful pilgrims repaid the icon with offerings of alms to the monk or directly to the icon. These symbolic gifts of jewels, valuables, or plaques retelling a miraculous story are called ex-votos. Hundreds of thousands of ex-votos still wallpaper the walls of the shrine. The positive resolution to every possible human need is declared, with abandoned crutches and braces and images of healed body parts, thousands of gold and silver hearts and images of miraculously conceived or healed infants. It is still a popular pious custom to melt down offerings of gold and jewelry to create ornate metal covers called revetments or okłady to cover and glorify wonder-working icons. This X-ray detail shows the wood panel of the Częstochowa icon, and it shows that the earliest donations of jewels were pinned directly into the icon. These X-rays reveal hundreds of tiny white dots. These are hundreds of nail holes, evidence of the vast number of offerings that once densely covered all parts of the icon. Many extraordinary valuable gifts that allowed the monks to expand their chapel and property to accommodate the swelling number of visitors. But as the settlement grew in fame and wealth, it became an open target for robbers and was one of the motivations for the image's imminent desecration. King Jagiełło was eager to prove a strong commitment to his new Catholic faith, encouraged by the piety of his saintly wife Jadwiga. He endowed many churches and monasteries, especially the expanding monastery of Częstochowa and its already famous icon. An attack on an image is either symbolic violence directed to the person it represents or an act to harm those who own or control the image. Both motives are behind the desecration of our icon, perpetrated by an unholy alliance of noblemen and religious reformers. The historian Jan Długosz was 15 years old when the icon was attacked, and through him, we know the names of the noblemen who led that invasion at Jasna Góra. Fedko Ostrogski, Jan Kuropatwa, and Jakub Nadobny had varied political grievances against both Opolczyk and Jagiełło. They resented the Polish-Lithuanian Union and wanted to recover their lost wealth after the installment of Opolczyk as governor. To give the looting a larger meaning and a larger number of participants, the noblemen enlisted the help of the followers of the early reformer Jan Hus from Bohemia, which is just over the southeastern border of Poland. The Hussites were eager to join. Factions of them were already militarized and had previously encountered the opposition of King Jagiełło. Theologically, Hussites resented the wealth and temporal power of the church, and like many Protestants, saw the veneration of images as idolatrous, the intercession of saints and the Virgin Mary as nonsense. This was the mob that descended on Jasna Góra on Easter Sunday, 1430. The monastery was sacked, everything valuable was stolen, culminating with the destruction of the icon. To help us understand the process of the icon's desecration and restoration, I've made a model to undergo the same process of transformation as described in Professor Kurpik's research. This first image is a rough painting of the Kremlin icon, which I'm using, again, not because it is the original one, but as a placekeeper for the icon's unknown original appearance. Next is the same icon as it would have been adorned by grateful clients with ex-votos and jewels attached directly into the panel. Jan Długosz describes how the icon was removed from its altar and how the valuable jewels and ex-votos were hacked off. The current conservator's x-rays show the aggressiveness of this attack. The deepest gouges are at the location of the most jewels, the upper veil of the Mother of God, and the wrists and the collars. But not only was the face slashed, but x-rays of the panel show that it has dozens of deep stab marks. After stripping and mutilating the image, it was smashed into pieces. The monastery was set on fire, and it was so devastated it took decades for them to recover and be rebuilt. The monks appealed to their protector, King Jagiełło, who ordered the icon be brought back to Kraków. It was put on display like a mutilated corpse to demonstrate the violence of the attackers. The attackers were put on trial, they were judged and sent into exile. King Jagiełło personally supervised restoring the icon. At the time of its restoration, the schism between Eastern Orthodoxy and Roman Catholicism was absolute. The chronicles say that at first Ruthenian, meaning Orthodox iconographers, were brought to restore the image, but their paints rolled off. I can understand this. If the icon was varnished, it would be very difficult for the egg temper to adhere to the surfaces. But also, the damage that was done to the icon required something much more substantial than patching. With no hope of returning the icon to its original appearance, the surviving 3 smashed boards were replaned and joined to form one panel. All fragments of the original panel needed to be preserved. If St. Joseph and the child Jesus had made this tabletop, it was a very rare and valuable document of the reality of the Holy Family. As part of the repair, and this is still common for any icon painted on wood, a fresh piece of fabric was glued over the joints of the board to prevent splitting. Then, an entire new sheet covered the whole surface, blotting out the remaining scraps of that first icon. At some point, a raised halo was added, something unknown in Eastern iconography but common in medieval Italian painting. Dismissing the Ruthenian iconographers, the decision was made to have the icon completely repainted. The king procured the services of an unknown, unnamed, illustrious artist, said to be the greatest in the world. Like the author of the original icon, we have no idea who this was. There is some speculation that it was an Italian painter from Siena because of the distinctive shape of the narrow eyes. The restorer's decisions are very curious. It's somebody absolutely unfamiliar with the rubrics of Eastern Orthodox icon painting. At the time of the destruction, for reasons of piety and politics, Jagiello did not direct the image to be restored as an Eastern Orthodox icon, but as Western Catholic religious art. But it still needed to retain the most identifiable traits of the original icon that people remembered at the time of its destruction. The artist stayed close to the silhouette, but everything internally was translated into a more Western Gothic style. If we look at icons painted at the same year as the Czestochowa restoration, we can see how radically the restorer departed from the standards of Eastern Orthodox iconography. The S-curve of Czestochowa's veil first appeared in Gothic sculpture, and it casts a shadow on her face. The recreation abandoned or misinterpreted the language of formal qualities of an icon and created a very eclectic synthesis of Western religious art superimposed over Orthodox iconography. For example, he kept the star on her upper veil, but why did he omit the other two stars on her shoulders? These are essential symbols mandatory on any icon to identify this woman as the Mother of God. An important change was how the restorer replaced the icon's inner illumination with an external light source, casting soft dark shadows along her forehead and cheeks. His technique has more in common with the smoky blending of a Da Vinci painting than the inner transfigured light of a Rublev icon. There are so many questions I want to ask this artist. Why are Mary's eyes not level? The right eye higher than the left? Why is she peering outward in two different directions through heavy eyelids? Why is her head and face so large, but her hand so small? Why is her body just one large flat blue shape? Why are the Christ child's hands so enormous? Why did you replace the scroll in his hands with a book? And what did you do with his other foot? Why does the halo cut into the silhouette? And how can you justify this hump in Mary's shoulder? If we look at similar icons, we see it was the angle of her pose, but the restorer kept it without understanding why. I must assume the ambiguity of the icon and all its other aspects show the same uncertainty. But for some reason, they needed to be included to ensure its continuity as that first authentic icon. X-rays have located the three layers of fabric I've described, and buried under everything, Professor Kurpik has located the three small surviving scraps of the first icon. These are the pieces that I've indicated on the first image in red. You can see how each small scrap is on one part of the shattered panel that's been put back together. But the only way to view these three small scraps in all of their clarity would be to peel away the current icon on top, a procedure that would destroy the entire image. It's swallowed up inside the current icon like the memory of a previous life. One author, pondering these same paradoxes, wrote that the icon of Czestochowa, like Poland itself, is neither Eastern nor Western, but both. This would make sense if the new Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's identity was intentionally forged with Western Catholic political, not Eastern, not Russian, not Orthodox, but still, it could not turn its back on its own Eastern and Slavic roots. We are not looking at a shifting of superficial styles, nor is the change in the icon about a change of taste in the time, but the transition of one worldview to another. The icon was remade as a hybrid of both. Since we know the top layer of the icon is an overpainted image, the scars on her cheek were recreated. The restorers originally painted the scratches red like blood. In the words of a scholar of the icon, he wrote, "These scratches are very genteel souvenirs of the brutality of the attack on the image. For Poles, whose country would likewise be carved up into pieces and much later be put back together, the icon remained an important focus of not just piety, but national unity." Another curious decision made by the restorer was the patterns on the garments. The Christ child's body has some volume, as if a garment covered a body, but Mary's body is an absolutely flat blue shape, patterned with fleur-de-lis. There is no precedent for this in Orthodox iconography, but there is in Western art. The lily has always been used as a symbol for the virginity of Mary, but the fleur-de-lis is an iris, not a lily. In French Gothic art, their Madonnas wear this emblem of royalty, transferred from the coat of arms from the royal house of Anjou. These fleur-de-lis were intentionally applied to the icon, done in homage to the pious memory of Jagiello's now deceased wife Jadwiga, who descended from the same French royal family of Anjou. By stamping the icon with his wife's coat of arms, he asserted that the icon and its monastery were under the direct protection of the King and Queen of Poland. But another burning question I need to ask this restorer is, if the rubrics of iconography say images of saints glowing from within with uncreated light, why did you reinterpret her so darkly? There are many images of Black Madonnas in Europe. Each has its own reason and its own origin and explanation. The most ancient images were rebaptized pagan mother goddesses, where black earth meant fertile soil. Some images were black because they were made of the rare wood ebony, which was immune to insect damage and was as expensive as gold. Or they were stuck in fires, or for some other reason, but none of these is why the Czestochowa icon is so dark. As I said before, in my family, we said our morning prayers to a framed print of Our Lady of Czestochowa. And when I asked my mother, why was Mary so dark? With great pride, she told me that Poland was the only country in the world to have a real picture of Mary. Then she told me that the Virgin Mary and Jesus lived in a different part of the world and looked like the people who lived there. They were olive or dark-skinned Jews. It's still a startling memory and a remarkably insightful interpretation coming from a homogeneously white Poland filled with Slavic, blonde, and blue-eyed representations of the Holy Family. Although this is not the reason for our icon's darkness, I admit, I prefer it to the very real but rather boring truth, which I'll get to you in a minute. Not just because it's what my mother told me, but because she's right. Miriam of Nazareth and her son Yeshua were darker skinned, and it takes away some of our projections of who we wish or imagine Jesus and Mary were, white and Christian like us. This interpretation has resonated with such authenticity, not only in my house, but all over the world, that it's brought a global veneration for the Polish Black Madonna. To visit the American Czestochowa in Pennsylvania and see just as many Haitians as Poles praying to a common mother. But let me get back to making an icon. You may wonder what iconographers argue about. To this day, a hot issue of contention is what is the best way to varnish an icon? Traditionally, some kind of vegetable oil was used, flax, poppy seeds, or nuts. But it can take years to dry to a hard protective film, and who can wait that long? Chemical dryers like lead were added to speed up the drying, but if the lead is not prepared well, or too much is added, the oil can crack or in time oxidize and darken. In this 16th century Russian icon, we can see that it's in the process of being cleaned, but I also want you to pay attention to how very dark the icon became. it's not even possible to see what's underneath. It was impossible to find any solvent strong enough to dissolve this dark film until the beginning of the 20th century, when acetone was produced. In Russia, this cleaning of ancient icons revealed the bright colors and integrity of the original ancient icons, leading to a renaissance of canonical iconography. Before the arrival of acetone, there was only one solution: paint the icon again, but on top. Some icons have 5 or 6 layers of newer icons on top of them. Each layer often included changes and edits, superimposing the contemporary style of its time. In this icon, the top layer is a Baroque 18th century overpainting, but a restorer has opened up a window to reveal a 13th century original underneath. So according to the standards for Russian, it would have been nothing odd for the restorer of the Czestochowa icon to rework the prototype while keeping some essential elements of the original. My theory is that at the time of the first icon's destruction, the varnish must have already darkened, and the second image was repainted as it appeared before its desecration, unclear and murky, the way people remembered seeing it. I strongly believe this was true of the original Czestochowa icon, because we will watch the same process of oxidation and blackening happen a second time and see how artists tried to make sense of what was underneath and inside. Let me show you what happened between 1430, when the icon was freshly repainted, and 1910. There is no icon or artwork in any museum today that has not gone through some process of conservation. The first task is always the removal of the varnish. Over the course of 400 years, the same problem snuck in that turned the original icon's skin brown. We can see from this photograph of the icon's 1910 coronation, taken in bright daylight, there was nothing left to be seen. The varnish had darkened so much, it blotted out everything. The only thing to give the icon a human form was its jeweled covers. Rather than repaint it or risk ruining it, it was kept as is until 15 years later, acetone gave a restorer the power to open up the icon. When I was learning to paint iconography, I always sought out the earliest prototypes. And when searching for the earliest historic copies of the Czestochowa icon, it boggled my mind that no two looked alike and resembled the face we see today, nor will you find any published before 1925. In these 19th century chromolithographs, artists were forced to reinterpret the blacked out faces with idealized placekeepers. 400 years ago, the anonymous artist who repainted the shattered icon faced the same dilemma. In 1925, as a gesture of gratitude to the Mother of God for the reunification of Poland, the Czestochowa icon underwent its own parallel restoration. I was very excited to find the published handbook of the 1925 restorer Jan Rutkowski was shelved 10 miles away from my home at the Central Connecticut State University Archives of Polish and Polish American Life. These are photographs from his handbook. Rutkowski's 1925 cleaning was the first time anyone had seen the faces in centuries. One can see under the foot of the Christ child, the restorer has left 1 square black inch of the unrestored icon compared to the colorful cleaned areas. We accept this 1430 version as the authentic icon, with its scars, internal contradictions, and ambiguities. Like acetone, until the invention of the X-ray, no one had the tools to uncover what was underneath. But even today's X-rays are not able to capture a clear picture of what is still buried under these faces. Unless you spend Holy Week helping Professor Kurpik conserve the icon, you will never see it exposed in its entirety like this. As soon as he is finished, The icon is refitted with a new covering. Only the faces, hands, and foot are left exposed. She's put back in her ebony altar for an Easter morning unveiling. To protect the icon from further damage, nothing touches its surfaces anymore, and ex votos and donations of jewels are densely stitched into these padded covers. The dress on the left is covered with donations of coral beads, the only jewelry a peasant woman would own, and she wears a pair of crowns donated by Pope Pius X in 1910, he said, for the consolation of the suffering Polish people who had no nation at the time. On the right, the amber gown was commissioned by Pope John Paul II, and the most recent created dress is made from meteorites. But for me, the most moving dress is this one. It's called the Robe of Fidelity. What I find amazing is not the precious jewels and gems and rubies, but that the hems of the garments are made from hundreds of wedding bands, gifts from the grateful wives and mothers of Poland. It's hard to look at these and not wonder what could have made them feel so much gratitude that they would offer up the only piece of jewelry that they owned. Each ring is the silent witness of one human life. If I could keep you here for another 4 hours, I could share some of the stories that spread the reputation of the icon. They catalog every possible human tragedy, and it would be impossible to listen to them if there was not a happy ending. Some are epic, like the repelling of the Swedish army. Others are intimate, like the rescue of a drowning child or a safe return of a soldier. Each stones is one of those stories. But pictures don't need jewelry, and diamonds are worthless to the Mother of God. But each bead or stone is a sign of the end of suffering or some new joy. In that sense, even gold and diamonds are not enough to say thank you. The most stunning ex votos at the shrine are gifts with absolutely no material value. Broken shackles, barbed wire from a concentration camp survivor, a rosary made from spit, and the modest bread rations of a Siberian refugee, or John Paul II's cassock studded with bullet holes. To wrap up, as I said before, every copy of an icon is a new icon. Even if we find a way to reveal the hidden scraps of that first icon, or discover its real origins or its real author, the version we see today is the authentic icon. It's with this face she has listened to garments literally made out of the gratitude of generations. Centuries ago, somebody painted out the formal qualities of an icon to create what we venerate today as Our Lady of Czestochowa. But in function, she is absolutely an icon. The purpose of every icon is to open a window to connect us with a parallel eternal reality. In person, it is very difficult to look at the icon of Our Lady of Czestochowa as a thing, someone. It has such an uncanny sense of presence. When I make copies of the icon, I remember what my teacher told me. Be careful, when you copy great icons, all you can hope to do is make a bad copy. I just tried to make as loyal of a copy as possible, not my own interpretation. Unlike other contemporary icon painters, I don't attempt to retrofit her back into the format of Eastern Orthodox icons. She doesn't need it. She jumps over the boundaries of canons and rubrics. I always scratch in her scars. I don't change a thing, not even the position of a single fleur-de-lis. Everything is there for a reason. Out of awe, I don't dare. Everything is there the way it's supposed to be.
Excellent. Well, thank you so very much for your information there, Mark. That was just a fantastic presentation and amazing. And the images you used were just stunning. And we got several questions from our audience, but if I can ask you first, how did you come across all these images?
It's my library.
Excellent.
I've been collecting these for like 30 years.
Fantastic.
So, yeah.
Good. So if you wouldn't mind, Mark, if you don't mind, stop sharing your screen so that way we can people can see your face a little bit more, and we'll go ahead and get through some of the questions that we had here. We had both questions as well as comments. So some of the comments that we had one over on our YouTube channel. It says that Our Lady of Aparecida here in Brazil has also appeared in black color, and she defends our country against all evil. We did have a question in our Zoom box here where they were asking very briefly if you can go over about the color of the icon again. Why is the icon so dark?
Why is it so dark? Because the varnish darkened. And, I'm guessing that there was a period of about 120 years from between when the icon was originally painted to when it was brought to Częstochowa. And 120 years is plenty of time for that varnish to darken. And when the image was destroyed and reconstructed, it had to be repainted the way people remembered it. And people remembered it as being very dark and murky. Otherwise, they wouldn't have accepted it as the restored authentic icon.
Mm-hmm. Very good. All right. Is Our Lady always appears in a jeweled dress? Are there very many? And it's a great presentation according to this commenter.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there are. When you visit the treasury at Jasna Góra, they have them all lined up. And as I said, the last one they made was actually made out of meteorites. And like I said, they're very powerful things to see because you understand that each speck, every jewel, is an answered prayer. So I think there's probably about 15 of them.
Excellent. All right. So someone says here that this is fabulous. Thank you very much. Can you briefly explain the deep affection Poles have for Our Lady of Czestochowa today?
How do I explain it? I mean, she's just there. There's an identification with her. There's a sense that, like I said, she's not something, she's someone. And it's just a feeling that she belongs to us. But as I said before, because of the darker color, now the world says she belongs to everybody.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Can you clarify, Mark, the Swedish invasion did not cause the slashes and the dark color. It's caused by the varnish, correct? It's
caused by the varnish, yeah. Okay. Like I said, it's a very boring reason. And I much prefer, the legends or my mother's explanation, which I think is just perfect. But that's what legends are for. Legends are placekeepers until we understand the facts.
This one question came in. It says that I heard that the scars on our mother grew even deeper and they have been repainted over and over. Is that true?
No. When they first were restored, they were painted to look like blood because the icon, again, wasn't something but someone. But no, the scratches were put in.
Okay. Now, speaking of colors, do you know what pigments were used?
To me, it looks like the blue is lapis and it looks like that the red is cinnabar. And that would have made sense. The reason the Virgin Mary started appearing so often in blue garments was because the pigments were given as votive offerings. And lapis is more expensive than cocaine. It is one of the most precious minerals you can get. It's very difficult to acquire. And was oftentimes, it was a gesture of the love of the donor to spend that kind of money to have the icon repainted with them.
Is there a specific date for the August pilgrimage?
It's the first Sunday after the Feast of the Assumption.
Okay. So if you know your Feast of the Assumption, it's the first Sunday after that.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So if there was a title that you would give Our Lady of Czestochowa, like Our Lady of Mercy or Sorrows, etc., what would it be? Or do Polish people identify with her with a specific title already?
There's hundreds of titles of her. It's a whole litany. My first thought was, wounded, a wounded figure, and a vulnerable figure. but I don't know what kind of a title I would give her. So I don't have anything new. I would just use the Litany of Loretto.
Very good. And when St. John Paul II visited in 1997 during his apostolic voyage to Poland, it was May and June of 1997, he gave several, he had a very specific prayer that he gave her and called her the Mother of Unity and Peace, and said, strengthen the bonds of communion within the Church of your Son, enliven ecumenical efforts so that all Christians, by the power of the Holy Spirit, may become one family of sisters and brothers of Jesus Christ, the one Savior of the world, yesterday, today, and forever. And I would say, even given some of the state of affairs for today, I think that prayer is most especially relevant. And it seems like he definitely had a very close connection with Mary, given that his motto was Totus Tuus. But, of course, he was the head of the Catholic Church for many years. And we have a couple of questions here regarding, particularly the Roman Catholic churches and why they don't have icons like the Eastern Catholic churches.
I would say we did exactly have the same kind of art until about the 13th, 14th century. And, there was that real after effects of the schism, which was in 1054. And, it's like a terrible divorce that nobody gets everything when the family is split up. And our art worked in two different directions. In the Catholic Church, it developed in a more humanistic direction, and our artwork evolved into sculpture. And in the Eastern Orthodox Church, it developed more internally and stayed as two-dimensional images. Until the Second Vatican Council, our churches were filled with artwork. And I'm starting to see more and more icons being placed in Catholic churches, mostly by lay people who feel the after effects of that vacuum.
Very good.
But I wanted to say one other thing, and that's that, before the Second Vatican Council, Catholics wouldn't have had any interest in icons. It was through the ecumenical heart of John the 23rd, who stopped using that ugly word schism and said instead the Eastern Orthodox Church is our separated sister. And John Paul II advocated that anybody who wants to be a religious artist start with icons and return to the apostolic simplicity of those early days. So it's a very hopeful and optimistic sign to see that the two churches are coming together when so many other things still tear us apart.
St. John Paul II wrote the letter to artists, and it was very, very key about a lot of different teachings about that. He also helped to found the art studio Centro Aletti, and the mosaic artwork of the St. John Paul II National Shrine was done by the artists from that studio there, including its founder, who was personally appointed by St. John Paul II. That was Father Marko Rupnik, a Jesuit priest. And he, the focus of the Centro Aletti is really to just try and unite the Eastern and Western styles of art and focus more on commonalities rather than differences. And that's exactly what St. John Paul II, really taught a lot about. We do have a couple of other questions that are here regarding, kind of some of the materials that are there. So have they been able to acquire a sample of the original pigments to possibly know where the original came from?
Well, no, because they would have to peel off the icon that's on top right now. That's the only way to access those scraps that are underneath. And, this information I'm presenting to you, it's only 10, 12 years old. That he discovered that original icon underneath. But no, it would have to be like a biopsy. You'd have to go through all of those layers to pull something out, but it would create too much damage.
Gotcha. Well, speaking of the layers here, do you know what varnish is currently being used to protect the icon?
I have no idea. Conservators have all of these special things that they use all the time. I do know that contemporary conservators never apply anything that cannot be removed easily.
All right. Where was the icon stored during World War II?
I don't know. I think that it was stored at Jasna Góra. Just one anecdote I heard about that. It doesn't answer your question, but that Hitler is very eager to own it. And he was collecting lots of relics like the sacred lance because he thought that they somehow would give him power, that they held some kind of energy in them like a fetish. And that if he owned them, he could control how to use them. And his name is actually in the register as a visitor. But of course, yeah, but he never acquired it.
Very interesting. All right, can you please comment on the miraculous victory thanks to Our Lady of the siege of Nyazna in the 1600s?
Just another victory for her, you know. What could I say? Thank you. That's all.
All right. So one comment here in the chat says, great presentation, Marek. What is the significance of the year 1382 to the icon? In 1982, this person here went to Poland for the first time and attended a 600th anniversary celebration on August 26th, which was attended by thousands of pilgrims. And he'd been under the impression that it was 600 years since the icon was brought from Hungary,
Right.
but it wasn't sure where they got the notion from.
Yeah, 1382 was the date that a Polchik brought the icon to Częstochowa, but he brought it from Belz, not from Hungary. And like I said, we can't say anything for sure about that icon's origin before it shows up in his hands. The monks who lived there were already Hungarian, but that date is the 600th anniversary of its arrival. That's what the back of that icon, that painting on the back, celebrates it, but it's its 300th anniversary.
Excellent. All right, so a few more questions here. Let's see if we can get through them in kind of a rapid fire style. And I do want to ask another question. It'll take a little bit of a longer period. But are any of the images that you shared your own copies of the icon?
No, just the early one where I'm showing painting it. That's a piece that I started to make for myself.
Okay. During the pilgrimage, so people do walk quite a bit of a distance. When they stay en route, how are they fed?
I don't know. I have to make it myself. But from what friends have told me, it's just people do it. And friends of mine who have walked the Appalachian Trail say the same thing. People leave out for them food, and they call it trail magic. And I assume that the same thing is true. You know, it's an act of mercy to be able to feed a pilgrim who were on their way.
Fantastic. All right, so are there any specific hymns for this icon, and is there a special worship service for the icon?
Not a worship service, veneration, and it's nothing different than any other kind of Marian veneration service, a litany or a rosary. But probably the one song that is clearest about her is just a song called Czarna Madonna, which means the Black Madonna.
Excellent. All right, so what else do we have here? A couple more. Got a couple more I don't know. We answered that one. So how did you come across all these images in your presentation? I think I may have asked that one already.
I have them. I have them. But that one book, the Rutkowski Restoration Manual, I was just flabbergasted, you know, to find it. It's 10 miles up the street from me, and I never thought I would be able to see that.
All right, looks like kind of the last two questions that we have over here. You asked some questions about what you would want to ask the restorer of the image. Do you have any speculations as to what some of those answers might be?
Yeah, I explained it in the lecture that he was somebody unfamiliar with rubrics of Eastern Orthodox iconography and misinterpreted them. But a lot of them, they're just such glaring, strange, eccentric features that I'm assuming that it had something to do with the way that the original icon looked like, but that he didn't understand how to harmonize everything together.
Understood. All right. Well, you do have quite a few admirers here in the audience. So no questions. Just want to say thank you. This is fascinating. Great learning experience. So thank you so much. It's so needed solace for unrest hearts these days. And listening to such presentations is so needed and deeply appreciated. Great job. Thank you so much. Well, we do have one last question that came in here before I get to our final question. There was a time under communism when the icon was not allowed to travel from Yasna Gora, so they took it out of the picture and just had the frame travel. Where was the picture at that time?
Yasna Gora. You know, it never leaves the monastery. You know, it's kept in a safe. The mechanism that it has, it's on pulleys and it comes up and down. And in the evening, it's veiled and the icon is put back into its vault. So I don't think it ever left. But yeah, that's a very poignant gesture. to have that empty alquad traveling around, and you got that feeling of its absence in your life.
Mm-hmm. All right, last question for the evening there, Mark. Can you please tell us why you got into iconography beyond what I read in the bio? And can you also tell us a little bit about your, hopefully I'm saying this correctly, Seraphic Restorations Liturgical Art Studio?
Mm-hmm. I always had a vocation to be an artist. I understood that. But my vocation to be an icon painter came later. And I was living in New York, and I was making and exhibiting my work. And my father was at a parish council meeting at our parish in Bristol, St. Stanislaus. And the pastor noticed that we didn't have a copy of the icon, and he wanted to buy it. And my father said, "Buy it. My son is an artist, and he'll make it for you." And that was my first icon. I was very angry at him because I understood I wasn't the right person at that time to make that icon. But, I did it. And I did it with a certain amount of distance and with a certain amount of, I don't know how to describe it. It was a very competent copy, but I didn't want to feel what was inside of it. And I didn't understand what I was doing until I saw people praying in front of it. And I felt stupid. And, that's when I discovered that pearl of great price. I, had never made anything that tied together the threads of my life so naturally as that one icon. And I had never made anything that was so necessary and practical to the world. And that's how I started to study iconography. I worked on my own for 6 years, and then I found a remarkable person to study with.
Excellent. Fantastic. So just a couple of last little images that I would like to bring up here. Since you got to share most of yours, let me share a couple of ours. Now, over at the St. John Paul II National Shrine, some of the images that we have available in our exhibit are, among other things, it is Our Lady of Czestochowa. So we've got an image, as you can see here, that's in our exhibit. You see it's very much ordained with jewels. It was a gift that was given to St. John Paul II. And you can see it here in our exhibit, what it looks like when it's on display within the context of everything else. And it is in our section that talks about the 9 days that St. John Paul II spent in Poland during his first apostolic trip as Pope to Poland itself. Now, before we close out, I do want to just inform our audience here about some of our upcoming programs. October 17th, we are going to be celebrating the Feast of St. John Paul II. It's going to be on a Saturday. But we also have his actual feast day. We're going to have some celebrations on the 22nd, both in person as well as virtual. In person will be very limited, and we're going to have some details we'll be releasing on how you can register for these in-person events through our Eventbrite channels. Be sure to check out our website at jp2shrine.org, and you can also follow us on social media, and we'll be posting the details there as soon as they are available, including registration information. In the evening, we'll have the Evenings with the Merciful Jesus that's hosted by our Sisters of Our Lady of Mercy. And on November 1st, since we are owned and operated by the Knights of Columbus, we will be having a massive Thanksgiving for Blessed Michael J. McGivney. Again, details on that will be forthcoming. We got a lot more things that are lined up for this fall season, so be sure to follow us on social media. And so thank you again, Marek Czarnecki, for joining us today. We really appreciate your time. We hope that you've enjoyed this webinar brought to you by the St. John Paul II National Shrine. And while we are currently closed because of the coronavirus impact, we will be holding some limited in-person gatherings, as I mentioned, in honor of St. John Paul II's feast day later this month, as well as more virtual events to bring the shrine to you. Please visit our website or follow us on social media, including YouTube, to learn more about these events, view exclusive content, stream Mass online, as well as prayer at the hour of mercy. And thank you again very much for joining us. God bless you. Stay safe and be well. Thank you again, Marek.